Thanks so much for joining today. I'm excited to be here with you, and so I just will give a quick sort of. Oops, hang on one second. There we go. Give a quick sort of background on me so that you know a little bit more about who I am and what my experience has been in education. So as Anna mentioned, I'm the Director of Admissions Counseling at Gallon Education, and we're sort of a multi-services firm, and I direct our team of college counselors and graduate school admissions counselors. And prior to my current role, I actually worked for about 12 years at a variety of different charter and independent schools. And so I think that some of the tips I'm going to talk about today are really focused on preparing teenagers for or sort of what types of things they can do as they return to school to prepare themselves eventually to apply to and be successful in college. But I think that, but some of these things I think are just sort of general tips as an educator about what can help make students have the most successful experiences in high school that prepare them for whatever comes next. And so I'm originally from Wisconsin and live in Milwaukee currently, but I went to college on the East Coast and lived in both New York and Boston before coming back to Wisconsin, where I'm from. And I am, I think, excited to be a presenter and also a member of the Kunik community. I have a 6.5-year-old daughter who keeps me humble and on my toes, and working parenthood is definitely an exciting journey. So I love being part of this group of really interesting, helpful people. So thanks again for joining. And so without further ado, I've got a few thoughts on kind of what can be done to help get ready for the school year that may have, I think for many people, just began in the last couple weeks. And so the first thing I want to talk about, again, is just sort of with respect to college admissions, that when a student is about to apply to college, there are kind of 4 basic parts of a complete college application and 4 things that colleges will be evaluating when they look at an application. And so I think that regardless of where your students are in their sort of teenage years and high school experience, whether they're going back for their senior year or they're just starting out high school, sometimes it's helpful just to think about kind of what's going to go into the finished product when this journey ends. And that kind of helps us think about what are the things that are really important to do now to set students up to be successful in their post-secondary planning. And so the 4 basic things that colleges will be considering for the most part in evaluating students for admission are the student's academic record, first and foremost, which is the courses that the student took, and also the grades that the student earned in those courses. It includes sometimes test scores, like the ACT or SAT. Colleges are interested in an activities list or resume that that they ask for as part of their application. And the activities list is basically a compilation of all of the things that students have done outside of their courses for credit. So that encompasses not only things like school clubs or athletics, but also things like family responsibilities, babysitting for younger siblings or caring for elderly relatives. It includes work experience, jobs, internships, even hobbies sometimes are good things to include in applications. Colleges also ask for letters of recommendation that come from high school teachers and from a guidance counselor. And in most cases, colleges will also ask for at least one, sometimes multiple essays that are written by the students sometime in or right before senior year. And so these are the 4 things that together make up a completed application. And ideally, they make up sort of the story of your experience in high school that, obviously, and a college application can never sort of truly capture all that is, your child. But by including things that are both sort of strictly academic and things that speak to their passions, interests, and experiences outside of school, and things like sort of character and extenuating circumstances and determination, that together, sort of all of these four things compiled equal kind of the story of a student's high school experience. And so I think that what I wanted to talk about today are some of the kind of very practical things that students can do that I think in the end benefit their chances of admission to the colleges that they are hoping to attend, but also, and probably more importantly, they set them up to have a meaningful, healthy, and productive high school experience, which is obviously what we're all sort of hoping for this year. And so my first big tip is for students to go into the school year and to think not just about the grades they're going to earn in their classes, but also to think about the relationships that they will build with their teachers. And in my experience, this isn't often something that students give much concrete thought to, but I think that I wish it was. I think that certainly students don't need to have terrific, close relationships with every single teacher, but it is important for them to have those sort of mentoring relationships with at least a couple. And one reason is that, particularly for students who are going into their junior year, that the teachers that they have will be the ones who write the letters of recommendation that are submitted to their colleges, but also because, having been a teacher, I think I can say that, teachers are much more willing to, whether we like to think this or not, they're more willing to sort of help out a student that they feel like they know and respect and like than someone who's never spoken to them outside of the classroom before. So if you, let's say, are in a bind and need to ask for a last minute extension, you're much more likely to get that from a teacher who really knows you and understands who you are and your character and your life than someone who you've never spoken to before. So this little sort of checklist on the right is actually from the Common Application, which is the most common, shockingly, application platform that students will use when they apply to college. And these are the sort of categories that teachers are asked to rate students on when they are writing their letters of recommendation. And so one of the things that they're asked to rate students on is really obvious: academic achievement. How did the student do in your class? But the rest of them are actually, qualities that are totally independent of the student's grade. Things like the quality of their writing, whether they contribute productively to class discussions, whether they demonstrate maturity, motivation, leadership, or integrity, whether they have concern for other people, whether they react well to setbacks. And what I often say to students is that you can be a pretty bad student in a class and still demonstrate these habits for the most part, right? I think, and so I think what I think is important to know is that to some extent, the relationships that you build with teachers really have very little to do with the grade that you earn in a class. And if you're willing to work hard and you're willing to, be friendly and reach out to both your teacher and other students in your class, it goes a really long way to building those positive relationships with teachers. The other reason that I think that is so important, beyond just the letters of recommendation that your teachers may be writing, and sort of the idea that you sort of are able to navigate your high school experience better if your teachers generally sort of like and respect you. But I think also this is an especially important skill when students get to college, particularly if they might be in a college environment that's larger than their high school environment, which for most students will be the case. And that I think proactively seeking out teachers, seeking to have your teachers be more than just the person who instructs you in class, but also might be someone who will mentor you, will teach you new things, will take you under their wing. That, probably some of us can relate to the fact that, the people that we have relationships with and that we know often are the people who really have helped us the most in our career. It's often not the specific content that we know, but it's sort of who we know and who's willing to vouch for us or put in a good word or let us know about an opportunity that we think that we should consider. And I think the same is true of teachers in high school and then especially in college, and students who are used to, sort of seeing their teachers as people and not just sort of the Charlie Brown, lecturer at the at the front of the classroom. I think it's a really important skill for students to learn over time, and they'll see really great benefits from that. So one of the ways that I think that, or my next sort of tip in terms of sort of back to school, what to do is to talk to your students about how to develop sort of a character portfolio. And one of the things that I like to do with students is to have them make like a little grid where they write down the things that they do outside of class. And instead of just writing down sort of what their activity entails, attend daily practice and weekly competitions, and volunteer once a week at a soup kitchen. Instead, that students can write about, that they sort of create a resume that includes examples of how your activities have caused you to interact with others. Maybe it's caused you to become a leader, as you've mentored younger students on a team or in a club. Maybe it's caused you to come in contact with people who are drastically different from you, and you've been able to learn from their sort of life experiences. But instead of sort of simply listing your achievements and your accomplishments in the things that you do, think about how they have demonstrated your character. And one really I think really helpful way to talk to your students about how to demonstrate character, because that's not always obvious to them, is to think about something that's known as circles of concern, which is sort of, as we mature, we're able to think more beyond our own basic needs, and instead to develop the confidence to sort of also be concerned about others. And so for high school students, it's really developmentally appropriate to get them to sort of initially think about, I might want to earn a good grade because, it will give me more choices. And then over time, they begin to think about like, I want to think about, I want to think about the person who's in my class who seems to always eat lunch by himself. And I wonder if that person likes eating lunch by himself, or if maybe he'd like to sit, with my friends. And so you sort of expand the circle of people that you think about and that you're concerned with. Eventually, you might sort of become concerned about, the person who is an essential worker and who is having to sort of choose between potential, illness exposure and earning a paycheck. And maybe over time, students think about issues like that. And then they think about sort of how they can address the things that they care about in the world through their own actions. And that is not the type of initiative that I think students develop quickly overnight. Instead, it's part of their maturing. But I think there are things that we can do as parents and certainly that educators can do to guide students in developing character over time and being more intentional about their actions so that they can highlight, write about, think about, and be more intentional in their actions so that they care for others and demonstrate their character. And then this one is a very practical one. My sort of third little tip, which is at most high schools and middle schools, there's kind of an add drop period. You know, there are a few weeks of time when students are allowed to test out their courses and their schedules. And if necessary, they're allowed to make some changes. They might be able to add a class. If a class feels like it's kind of unmanageable, they can maybe switch it. If, let's say, they're feeling as if there's a mismatch with their teacher, they can maybe, you know, elect to move into a new section, you know, whatever it is. But at most schools, you've got a little bit of wiggle room or a little bit of time at the beginning of the semester to make any adjustments to your schedule. And I think it's helpful as you think about going back to school to just think of this add drop period as a time of reflection for you and for your students. And the reason I say that is because for many of our kids, this is the first time that they have been back in, you know, 7 hours a day, the real deal classes in person. And then on top of that, they've got clubs or sports after school. And so they're going from, you know, summer and last year when they had, you know, probably more kind of control over their own schedules. They probably could go to class in their pajamas some of the time, to a much more structured set of courses. And for most people, that ramp up is stressful. And so what I hear from a lot of students, particularly this year, but even in a normal school year, is that going from kind of like 0 to 100 takes a lot out of them. They're often really tired at the end of the day in ways that they didn't necessarily expect. And they can often feel overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that they have to get done every day. And so I think it's just really important as parents to kind of, to as much as possible, be the voice of sort of reason, calm, and reflection in these first weeks of school. I think it's important to talk about sort of what your goals are for your students and to talk about them in terms of time, because I think that's a very concrete thing. And, you know, and time, unfortunately, is not a renewable resource that, you know, you only get so many minutes and hours in every day and so many weeks in a school year. And I think it's important to talk to students about what their priorities are. If the priority is to, you know, challenge yourself as much as you possibly can and take really difficult classes and engage in a lot of activities so that you've got the most impressive possible like resume coming out of high school, then that's fine. But it probably means that there are other things that are going to have to kind of give in your life. It might mean that as parents that some family time is going to have to give in a schedule like that. And so I think helping students understand that pretty much every decision you make about what to participate in comes with trade-offs in terms of time. And this is something where I think as parents, we actually do have, while our teenagers may think that we don't, we actually do have a little bit of expertise in this area, particularly as working parents, that we are probably pretty good at managing our time and developing priorities for how we spend it. You know, each day we probably get to choose, like, can I duck out of the office a minute early so that I can go to my daughter's tennis match? Or do I really, or is the FaceTime with, you know, my coworkers more important today because we've got a big presentation coming up tomorrow? You know, these are things that, you know, we've gotten probably pretty good at thinking through. And I think it's really appropriate to share that with our students and to show them that this is something we wrestle with also, to show them how we make decisions about how we spend our time. And also to show them that it's not going to be perfect ever, that that the nature of a compromise or a trade-off is that something gives. And so I think that's sort of a really helpful, or a place where, you know, again, I recognize that teenagers don't always like engaging us as experts, but it is something where I think we have much more expertise and experience than they do, and we can be helpful in sharing our own, you know, vulnerabilities, struggles, and decision-making tactics. The other big trade-off that I think students often, or parents often ask me about is sort of, what should I do to balance kind of the rigor of my courses? I know I'm supposed to be taking like as challenging of classes as I can, but I also know that I'm supposed to be trying to get as high of grades as I can. How do I sort of marry those two together? And I wish that there was sort of an easy answer, and unfortunately there isn't. But what I would say is that that I think you want maybe one way of framing it for students is to kind of walk them through what would feel like a better learning experience to them, taking the really difficult class and maybe not getting a grade that they're super excited about, or taking a class that doesn't challenge them as much and getting a grade that they're really happy with. And the answer to that might be different for each student, but the most important thing is for the student to feel as if they've learned and grown, and colleges recognize that. And there is no, I can sort of guarantee that if you asked, 50 colleges, like, do you prefer an A in an AP class or a B in a regular class? No one will give you a definitive answer. And so that's just sort of an important thing to keep in mind. And so before we move into questions, I just want to sort of mention a couple of resources that I think are very helpful. The first is that Georgia Tech University happens to have, I think, one of the best admission blogs out there. And the topics that they write about are really relatable regardless of whether your student or your family has any interest in Georgia Tech specifically. But one of the blogs that they wrote that I think is really top notch is one on sort of thoughtful course selection, how students decide what to take and how colleges view those decisions. And so, but I think a lot of their blog posts are really helpful. There's also two links here. There's sort of a partnership between Harvard University's initiative called Making Caring Common and something known as the Character Lab, which was also born out of, I don't know if many of you may know Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book called Grit. And these two organizations have really cool sort of practical discussion guides for parents and educators on how to talk to students about developing character and how they can sort of demonstrate that in their daily life. And so I think these are just cool resources to think about. And obviously all of us as parents want our students to be healthy, happy, and, and to be, good citizens. And these resources, I think, provide good discussion tools to talk about, and even that you could potentially bring to your own students' high school. So, there it is. There are the tips, and I'd be delighted to answer whatever questions I can.
It looks like we have a great question that came in through the chat from Donald. He wants to know, at what point does tracking of these activities truly become important? I don't know if you want to kind of expand on that at all, Donald, or if you want, Liz, you want to jump in?
So my wife and I basically adopted my nephew in October of last year, and so he's just now starting 8th grade. So we're trying to rapidly, we got an instant kid, brought into our family. So now we're trying to think about, he's in middle school right now. He starts high school next year. So I'm just trying to gear up on all of this. So like, do I need to be freaked out and like trying to get all this stuff? I want him to have a fun and loving childhood, but I also want him to be successful in life. So when do I start grinding down a little and making him focus more on school and thinking about college? Is it freshman? Is it, junior? Is it senior? Like, when does it truly matter?
That's a great question. I think that in terms of grades begin to matter freshman year. So I think that when students are beginning high school, I think one of the most important things to emphasize to them is that, your GPA, your grades, your courses matter now. And I think that as far as sort of activities outside of school, what I usually like to think of them as kind of like a funnel, where like when they start high school, I think it's a great thing for students to try a lot of activities that, particularly if they're coming from a smaller middle school to a bigger high school, often that's kind of natural because there might be a lot more stuff than there was when they were in 8th grade. And so try things and figure out what you like. And then over time, you kind of narrow it down. You spend more time on the stuff that you really feel committed to, and other things will kind of like fall by the wayside. And that's sort of the perfect, pathway. But I would say, as far as like when I advise clients on sort of when to start actually like looking at colleges and shift from just sort of like, we want you to have like a, broadening, healthy, academically oriented experience to like, okay, now we want to start kind of preparing for the next step. I would say like second semester, end of sophomore year is usually kind of a good time to shift your focus from like, we want you to take hard classes and challenge yourself and learn a lot and try new things. And now it's kind of like, okay, now let's start to explore what type of environment might be good for you after college and what types of things we can do to kind of, position you well to be able to achieve what you want.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, great question. My son has also just started 8th grade, so he turned 13. And so I'm really glad that you guys are having this session because, it's top of mind. I guess one question is, we live in Northern California, and where we are, like everybody we know seems to be interested in sports and like competitive soccer or competitive something. And so my son is not. He is into Boy Scouts. He wants to be an Eagle Scout. So like he's found something that's very motivating for him. But when it comes to college admissions, is it necessary to have an extracurricular component be an athletics or a sporting component?
It is not. No, I think that, which is interesting because I hear from parents a lot that, like sports is just, it's a huge time commitment, right? Like, I mean, like and can be a huge resource commitment too, that, these travel teams are not cheap. So I think that if a student is not thinking that athletics is something they would like to continue in college, then it doesn't have much value in terms of admission. The only value it would have is just kind of if it makes you happy, right? Like if playing tennis or playing soccer or playing lacrosse or hockey or football or whatever it is something that like gets you outside and gets you moving and has you having fun with your friends, then it has huge value. But it doesn't have value in admissions if you're not planning to play in college. And so I think, I often hear from college admissions people that the two sort of most like overlooked types of extracurriculars that students participate in but don't realize are so valuable. One are part-time jobs that, like particularly ones that are not like, oh, I'm working for my dad at his company, but like an actual job where you're interacting with like members of the public and in some sort of a customer service role, that it's a huge character builder and it's hard work, and colleges know that. And so they're very impressed when students have jobs as, baristas and, burrito makers and whatever sort of like service industry jobs they can get. And the other actually is, as you mentioned, it's like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts that because it's such a long commitment to get the Eagle Scout or the Girl Scout Gold Award, that they really value that, because most kids, and there's nothing wrong with not continuing your involvement in Scouts through high school, but when you do, it's a pretty big commitment, and the onus is entirely on the student, right, to do the project. It's not something you can like, toss money at and assume we'll be fine, So I think figuring out what you like is always going to be good, and there's no like, they don't have a checklist like, did you do a sport? Check. Did you have a job? Check. Did you do service? Check. It's, there are kids who get into college every year who are recruited athletes and have no other activities. And there are kids who've done hundreds of hours of volunteer work and have no other activities. And there are kids who do a little bit of everything. And so it's all kind of what you love to do and feel dedicated to.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if our colleges have taken into consideration kind of like a decrease in activity due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if so, what's kind of taking its place in importance?
That's a great question. I would say, I mean, yes, I think that in fact, colleges have added an optional question to the application, which is sort of, acknowledging that COVID and potentially even other sort of, factors may have have impacted your ability, it may have impacted your grades, your ability to engage in coursework, activities. And so I think they absolutely are taking that into consideration. I think that but I think more than activities, I think the thing that has been affected the most is just that, as more colleges stop requiring standardized testing, I think the biggest thing that colleges are considering in the place of both standardized testing and, extracurricular involvement is essay writing. Because I think it serves to provide context for the students' experiences, and the student has total control over what they write. Whereas, if like I have some students who are very interested in healthcare, and a lot of their activities were volunteering in healthcare settings. Obviously, that's been really, really hard to come by since the pandemic began, and I don't really know when that might be available to them again. But they have the freedom to write about that and to explain it in their essays. And so I think that's kind of the something that colleges are looking at, more carefully than they were a couple years ago.
Do you have any other questions? Anything else you'd like to add, Liz?
No, just, feel free to, I'm sure, I think you probably got my my contact info, and please feel free to reach out anytime if I can answer anything. And best of luck this year. I think it'll be a very interesting one.
For some change, but if you, we'll make sure to have Liz's contact information in Kunik. And then thank you so much for leading us today, Liz. And thank you guys for asking questions and participating. And we look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care.